General, the Kennel Master is asking for you. Lugstraken glanced up. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He'd only just returned from a training exercise in an adjacent valley. His bones hurt, and his shadow still lingered. He sighed, bracing one hand on the bed frame, and forced himself up. The ranger who'd woken him, Gomrek, gave him a sympathetic smile. He said it was important. Of course it was. He'd been woken up. Lug reached over and grabbed a bottle of mead near his bed. After taking a swig, he finally succeeded in taking a few steps. Gomrek stepped aside, and Lug shuffled onto the balcony. From the second floor of the ranger barracks, his balcony overlooked the atrium below, still busy with bodies. He was responsible for 256 rangers. In the early days, he'd tried memorizing all their names, but had long since given up on that. Only the old guard, the ones who'd served since he became Ranger General, remained in memory. His shadow was particularly strong today. It seemed to cling to his shoulder and whisper into his mind. They're all going to die. Think of your lifespan. You've another century at most, and in a millennium, all your troubles and strife will be forgotten. Your people are gone. Lug sighed and sipped at the mead. It didn't silence the shadow. It just made its words feel meaningless. Who cared about the timescale of mountains when his belly was warm and his brain was woozy? He walked along the balcony, hand gripping the railing. He knew he must look dreadful. Heavy bags under his eyes. Twigs were still in his hair. Mud still clinging to his cheeks from terrain drills. But to their credit, the few rangers who saw him stood and saluted. They don't even know you. To them, you're just a rank. They'll leave you. Just like Daneth. Just like Benrir. Just like Vondi. Lug drank. Leaving the ranger hall, Lug wiped his eyes. It was still bright out, and he hated the summer. It was offensive for the sun to remain in the sky so long when he felt like this. Here in Britalia, it was worse than it had been in the Vorn Mountains. The days longer during the summer, and even shorter during the winter. A headache was already building. He shielded his eyes from the sun and walked, half-blind, towards the kennel. The headaches were always the same. They started on his right temple, before spreading into a radial pattern until he could feel the outline of the hammer that killed him. Of course, death hadn't stuck for him. He'd been revived by Ild Brengrir. But you are dead. They just gave you a few more paltry moments to enjoy. Daneth died. Even the gods aren't immortal. All that awaits you is the hounds in an eternity of suffering. Lug drank. Lug had personally financed the kennel. Being a savior of the Dawi had its benefits, such as a monthly allowance from High King Tordek. It wasn't your run-of-the-mill kennel. It could support beasts as large as dire bears, and Lug hoped that one day it would. For now, though, it was just dogs. Near the door, Lug leaned against the wall. The headache was a bad one. He could feel the exact outline of the hammer on his skull, and it throbbed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He must have lingered long enough to be worrisome, because he heard a dwarf's voice off to his right. General, are you all right? Fine. His voice sounded dreadful, but it was effective. The voice left him, and after a few more minutes and a bit more drinking, Lug stood upright again. He entered the kennel. Normally, the kennel master and his aides could be found here, in the lounge room. At present, it was empty, and in the next room, Lug could hear muffled talking. He walked to the banded mithril door and opened it. Inside were 30 stalls, each large enough to house a dire bear, even an enraged one. Only 10 stalls were in use, holding the 20 dogs of the rangers. The kennel master couldn't be seen, but 2 of his aides were standing in the central walkway near stall 5. One was crouched down and grinning. The other held a blanket. The blanket moved. Lug walked forward, and the 2 aides noticed him. The one crouching stood up and saluted. The one holding the blanket nodded her head. General! They spoke in unison. The next voice that came was not gentle. Lug, get your ass over here. It was Herrig, the kennel master. An exile, he had tended to dogs in Liebstadt for a century before coming to East Lothier. Lug didn't bother correcting Herrig's informality. He walked over to the stall and looked inside. There was only one dog in the stall, a wolf dog with brown fur and brown eyes. She looked utterly exhausted, breathing heavily. Affixed to her breast were 6 puppies. Lug glanced over at the blanket and saw the 7th being held, the runt. Their bodies were sleek, and they shook their heads wildly, back and forth, attempting to squeeze as much milk out of their mother as possible. They varied in shade from brown to gray, though one was white. Herrig's hands were filthy, and he sat back, watching the mother carefully. He'd helped clean off the puppies, and likely aided the mother through the birth as well. Lug looked at Herrig. Herrig looked back at him. "What the fuck do you want me to do with them?" Herrig was exasperated. Lug realized this was the first litter of puppies born to their hunting dogs. They'd bought all 20 of their dogs from a variety of sources. He rubbed his head, and a headache was receding. "Leave them with their mother. If they grow big enough, we'll just use them as hunting dogs." Herrig stared at him. It was clear that a lowlander kennel had very different opinions on how to treat dogs compared to a dwarvish ranger. "And what about the ones that are no good for hunting? The runt, the scared ones?" Lug knew what he was implying. Culling was not a rare practice, but the thought of the act made him sick. "We can find some family in the valley that wants a new dog." Herrig looked at him and shrugged. "Fine." Lug looked at him, as if waiting for more. Realizing there was none, he nodded. "Good then." Herrig cleared his throat. "You don't have a dog?" Lug paused. "They all die. They aren't strong enough. Penrir was a direwolf, and even he died." "Yep." Herrig didn't press him, so Lug walked away. The headache was coming back. Lug stood outside the ranger hall with several other rangers. It was practice day. Lug walked toward the long field of targets. He'd long since stopped joining in. It only made his men feel inadequate. He still directed the trainings, though, giving pointers when he could. It was a hot summer still, suffocating the whole valley of Islathyr. They were dwarves, ironbeards, used to the chilly temperatures of the high-worn mountains or the stony earth, not open sun-drenched valleys. Lug had already sweated through his thick woolen shirt and the leather jacket over it. "General!" Lug glanced back and saw Herrig. The kennel master's face looked less craggly than usual, something approaching a smile. "Come here." Lug furrowed his brow, glanced at the practice field. No one needed help. He shrugged. He took a sip from his mead and walked with Herrig. They entered the kennel, and his 2 aides were in the lounge. They headed down the central walkway toward stall 5. Lug felt his chest tightening. "They're dead. They were weak. They are all weak." Herrig gestured. Lug looked in. He saw 7 puppies. They were 4 weeks old now, walking about, nipping at each other. Their eyes had opened, revealing little black facets, and their coats had developed. Their mouths hung open, revealing pink little tongues, and their tails moved wildly. The mother stood, watching over her brood. She looked exhausted. Lug couldn't help but smile, and glanced back at Herrig. "They all made it." Herrig nodded. "A blessing of Yevessa." He gestured to an empty stall across the way. "This is when the socialization period starts. Time to get 'em used to the rangers, teaching 'em when to stop their biting and all that. Figured you'd want to be first." Lug glanced back and then nodded. He walked to the empty stall and sat down. Herrig went into the other stall. "It's okay, Yule. He'll be right back. Watch. See? I'm just lifting him. He's okay." Unlike most men, Herrig didn't lift the tone of his voice when talking to dogs. He spoke to Yule like she was just another person. It must have worked, or she trusted him considerably, because Herrig entered the stall carrying a gray puppy. He set it down and handed a small leather bag to Lug before retreating. Lug looked into the pouch. Treats, of course. He looked at the puppy. Its ears were pointed, like triangles and flicked with little movements. The paws were immense, and his black eyes looked at Lug. He stood slowly, gangly legs wobbling, and began to walk about. Lug reached into the leather bag and took out a piece of mutton. The puppy had clearly learned the scent. It toddled forward and bit down immediately. Its pointed teeth gently bit into Lug's finger. "Gentle," he said firmly, not loud. It had come out unbidden, long centuries of spending time around beasts of the earth. The puppy retreated a bit and ate the mutton. Lug remained seated. It's so weak. It could be killed by a single goblin. It wasn't that Lug couldn't hear the shadow. He certainly could. But today, for some reason, it didn't hold much purchase. Sure, this defenseless creature couldn't defend itself. But Lug could. The puppy finished eating its mutton and walked over to Lug. It sat in front of him and yipped. Lug reached into the bag and took out a piece of tendon. The puppy gripped the other end, and the two began to tug. Minutes turned to an hour, and soon the puppy had exhausted itself. But Lug knew that wouldn't last. Benrir had played for an hour, taken an hour nap, and demanded another hour of play. Lug found himself smiling. He hadn't thought of Benrir like that in years. He had only thought of, he died in Westbar to the 100 heads of a hydra. It was pointless, like all the deaths. Bobby, Stinker. The puppy rested its head against Lug's hand. Lug, with a single finger, began to pet its head, and its little body began to move slightly closer. "So what are you going to name it?" Herrig was leaning against the door to the stall. He was smiling. Lug looked up. "Why would I?" Herrig chuckled. "'Cause it's yours. You clearly need it." Lug opened his mouth to protest, and then looked down. It would die. "What was that?" Herrig spoke from the stall door. He hadn't meant to speak aloud. He must have said it under his breath. Herrig looked at him. "I'll take 'em,"